This is every fight to make after UFC Louisville. I'm going to matchmake for all of the key fighters on this card. I think I got some quality matchups going, so we're going to jump right into it. Make sure you smash the likes, and if you're new, subscribe. Main event winner Nasruddin Imavov should fight against Robert Whitaker next, assuming Robert Whitaker is losing to Khamzat Chimaev. I think in general, a Whitaker-Chimaev loser makes a lot of sense for Nasruddin Imavov, but if it were Chimaev to lose, the waters could get murky. I'm feeling like Robert Whitaker is probably going to get submitted against Khamzat Chimaev, so I'm going to favor a matchup between Whitaker and Imavov, but damn, we're looking far down the line as opposed to like looking at absolutes. I know Imavov called out Sean Strickland after, but I just don't feel like that rematch is highly anticipated. I really don't think Sean Strickland should be forced to fight a guy he already beat in 2023, especially since Strickland's loss to Dricus du Plessis was extremely close and people would even consider it controversial. So you lose in a controversial split decision, and then you're beating Paulo Costa, and now you're forced to fight Nasruddin Imavov, who you already beat. I don't think that's fair to Strickland. So instead, Imavov to take on a Robert Whitaker who loses to Khamzat Chimaev sometimes later this year could end up making a lot of sense. Now, of course, the checkboard, the chess pieces, they got to all fall into place, right? Whitaker has to lose to Chimaev. He doesn't, need any substantial injuries, and then maybe he could be ready to turn around and fight Nasruddin Imavov later in 2024. I feel like Imavov's in a weird spot, because I'm not so sure he can move the needle enough to get major fights, but he just beat Cannonier, who's one of the elite guys in the weight class, but there leaves a lot to be desired with that early stoppage, and I do think he needs like a more prove yourself type of fight. And a Robert Whitaker who had lost to Khamzat Chimaev in a week or two from now would be a sensible fight for Imavov later this year. And I think it's actually a really fun clash of strikers because Imavov has a long, rangy striking style. Rob Whitaker is a very good kickboxer with power. I think it's a cool fight the way it could come together. And if Imavov was able to go out there and beat the former champion Robert Whitaker, even a Whitaker who's coming off of a loss to Khamzat Chimaev, I think he could jump way up in the rankings, and I think he could do marvelous things for his career. So to me, I think if Imavov is to fight forward in the rankings, he's going to need to let some pieces unfold with matchups that are forthcoming later on this month to secure what his future fate may be. So I'm going Imavov versus Robert Whitaker as the next fight. I think probably the loser of Khamzat Chimaev and Robert Whitaker would be next for him, because he's not going to get an Adesanya fight. He's not going to get a Strickland rematch. He's not going to get a du Plessis fight. What is he going to do? Is he going to get a fight against Brendan Allen? I don't think so. I think Brendan Allen's going to get a different fight. I don't think he's fighting Vettori, who's coming off of a dominant loss to the guy, Jared Cannonier, who Imavov just beat. So it's kind of like only option. So Imavov sit tight type situation, and I think the match might unveil itself in a week or two from now with the fight being Imavov versus Robert Whitaker. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Let's keep running. Let's jump to Jared Cannonier, who lost to Nasruddin Imavov by controversial stoppage. I think he should fight Brendan Allen. I think that fight makes a ton of sense. Brendan Allen is on a tremendous win streak right now. He's running up the ranks beautifully. Jared Cannonier, yes, he lost to Imavov, but he wasn't looking awful in the fight, and he was out for a while. I'll suspect because of the early stoppage, he'd rather make a rather quick turnaround and stay in shape as opposed to taking another year off. I mean, Cannonier is 40 years old. I'm assuming he wants to fight at the latest in like September. November would be real far out. I think he's ready to turn around fast. Brendan Allen's coming off of a hard win in a war to Chris Curtis. He avenged the loss in that fight. And even though Cannonier is coming off an L and Allen is coming off of a win, I still think the clash of these two makes a lot of sense here. I feel like you got to get a name on the resume for Allen. And this is the biggest fight of his life. Imavov did it. Imavov got the win over Jared Cannonier. Now he's got that stature in the weight class. And I thought about, I won't lie, doing Allen versus Imavov, but I sat on it and it just didn't feel rewarding enough to Nasruddin Imavov, who beat Jared Cannonier, one of the elites in the weight class, whose losses come to who? Adesanya, Whitaker, win over Strickland. Jared Cannonier is top caliber, and Imavov winning that fight deserves bigger things than a Brendan Allen fight. But Allen versus Cannonier is a tremendous fight night main event. I think it's Jared Cannonier getting another chance at the elite as opposed to being forced to fight way down. Like, I thought, okay, Roman Dolidze, coming off 2 straight losses, though, even though it was controversial, one of them to Vettori, who Cannonier beat up, and then the fight against Imavov was also a loss for Dolidze. I just feel like this is a sensible fight. Now, don't be shocked when the UFC does Paulo Costa versus Jared Cannonier. But I am strongly against that fight for the simple fact Paulo Costa has beat nobody ranked inside of the top 10, and he just gets kept at the upper echelon. He's coming off a dominant loss to Strickland, where people can say it was close as they want. He didn't look good. He was running that whole fight. Paulo Costa should fight Michel Pereira. Paulo Costa should fight down the rankings. He's 1-4 in his last 5, and he doesn't have a ranked win. Brendan Allen, coming off the Chris Curtis W, I think could be in a tremendous position, taking on Jared Cannonier in what could be a pretty massive fight. Big step up in competition and hard matchup for the young Brendan Allen, but I think this is where we find out what Allen's got. You take on Jared Cannonier, a Cannonier who's coming off of a loss, but still a Cannonier who's rather top caliber and had good moments in the Imavov fight. I love that matchup. Cannonier versus Brendan Allen is what I'm voting for. I think that makes a lot of sense. I guess there's a more clear-cut fight for Jared Cannonier right now as opposed to Nasruddin Imavov, but I don't want to penalize Imavov with the win, forcing him to fight back. Maybe availability concerns could end up totally changing these matchups, and Imavov might fight Brendan Allen, and they may go Jared Cannonier versus Paulo Costa. I know those are sensible fights, but this is every fight I'm trying to make, not what the UFC is definitely going to do. So I'm telling you what I would rather see is Imavov Whitaker, Cannonier versus Allen. Those are my thoughts for the main fight on the card. I want to keep moving down. I want to do Dominic Reyes versus Anthony Smith. That makes perfect sense. Both guys failed in fights against John Jones. Both guys have been in the upper echelon of the game for a while, slumping up until recent wins for both of them. I mean, you know, Dom Reyes got a career-saving knockout against Dustin Jacoby, because if he would have lost that fight, he would have had to retire, and he got a sick first-round KO. Anthony Smith got a career-saving submission win over Vitor Petrino. If he would have lost that fight, he probably would be in a position where he'd consider retiring. I think Dom Reyes, Anthony Smith is also a dope stylistic matchup. I think Reyes could hurt Anthony Smith a lot on the feet, and there's a big speed advantage for Dominic Reyes. I'll early pick it. I think Dominic Reyes would knock Anthony Smith out. I think Dominic Reyes is a bad matchup for Anthony Smith, and it gives Reyes a chance to build some more momentum again and keep on moving up the ranks for that final run in the end of his career. I think that's a good fight. I like Dominic Reyes and Anthony Smith a ton. I think it's a stylistic clash that's intriguing. I actually think it's favorable towards Reyes, but you know Anthony Smith will take it. Let's make that fight. I think that could be a potential main event too. I think it's an easy fight night main event that sells, and I think a lot of people would be curious to see it. Battle of OGs in that one. That's a fight that I'm voting for. Next up, Raul Rosas versus Chad Anheliger. I think Raul Rosas should be kept in the lower level of the UFC bantamweight division. I don't want to run him up too fast. He doesn't deserve somebody ranked or somebody towards the top. I think Anheliger is a scrappy veteran that could potentially give Raul Rosas some trouble, but it's going to test Rosas against a guy that can wrestle, a guy that scrambles well, a guy that's really hard to put away. And for a 19-year-old Rosas, I think those are the fights that make sense. You can't rush him up too fast. I'm not giving him a big name. I'm not giving him, Daniel Marcos. That's definitely not happening. I'm not giving him a winner of Miles Johns and De Andrade this weekend, because those fights are just, to me, nonsensical for a kid that's 19. I think he needs to be treated a little differently. Let's slow the roll. Let's not rush him to the elite. His best win on his record is this Tercios win. It's a massive W to have. And I think Anheliger is a tougher fight than Ricky Tercios. I think Anheliger puts up a good scrap against Rosas. He's very scrambly on the ground. He hits with some pop. He's coming off, a W in his last one against Charalampos Gregorio. So why not match those two up against one another? And also, it'd be cool to see because Anheliger's 37 and Rosas is not even 20 yet. So let's make that fight next. Moving down the card. Bruno Ferreira versus Bo Nickel. He called him out right after the fight. Why would you not do it? Ferreira had a sensational win over Dustin Stoltzfus, but when you dig into it, he didn't really look that skilled. And I think it is a fight that Bo Nickel can win. Bo Nickel's coming off the W over Cody Brundage. If Bo Nickel gets Ferreira to the ground, he'll give him trouble. I don't care about the judo base. Ferreira was taken down by Stoltzfus. He was on his back. And I think if Bo Nickel's on top of you, he's like an anchor in top position. And if they're striking, Ferreira definitely has the puncher's chance. But Ferreira swings wild. He gets reckless. He's got knockout power, and he's crazy on the feet. The spinning elbows were badass. But he's flawed. And I think this is a winnable fight for Bo Nickel that can put some legitimacy on his UFC record, because the fans don't give a shit about wins over Jamie Pickett. They don't give a shit about wins over Cody Brundage. But a win over Ferreira is going to be getting people talking. And I think it's the fight that has to be next. Bo Nickel already got called out. Answer the call out. Let's do Brazil Judo versus USA Wrestling. Count me in for that fight. I love it. Let's keep moving down. Ludovic Klein versus Matt Frevola. This is an awesome fight. Klein really shown a lot of evolution with his game and a massive W over Thiago Moises. Matt Frevola is coming off a loss to Benoit Saint-Denis, which is extraordinarily forgivable, but it was quick, it was gruesome, it was bad. He had a fight canceled, which was supposed to be against Michael Johnson. I think he should have to fight a guy on the come-up right now, and I think instead of giving him Michael Johnson, a guy that's more towards the twilight of his career, I think that Frevola should be forced to fight a hungry contender on the come-up in a stylistic clash that could definitely be fireworks. Ludovic Klein has an advantage in that fight. I do think he'd be live to beat Matt Frevola. He's a lot slicker in the stand-up, and I do think he's more athletic and explosive too. So those factors kind of give Ludovic Klein a massive opportunity to beat a Frevola, who has a W over Drew Dober and is a pretty well-respected guy in the UFC lightweight division. I don't think Klein deserves that top 15 fight yet, but damn, if there's somebody right in the top 18 that deserves to be matched up against a tough up-and-comer, it's Frevola. Let's do Klein Frevola. It's a sick fight. The loss to Benoit Saint-Denis, though it's not a terrible loss because Benoit's a high-tier guy, it still was brutal in the way that it went down, and I think that Ludovic Klein and Matt Frevola make sense. And I know the UFC doesn't always love matchmaking losers versus losers, but when I dug into the UFC lightweight rankings, I said, Ludovic Klein versus Diego Ferreira, Ludovic Klein versus Drakkar Klose, Ludovic Klein versus Matt Frevola is a needle-moving fight, and it's a really fun stylistic matchup, and that's what I'm going to root for. Let's keep moving down. Carlos Prates versus Nico Price. Yes, absolutely. Prates is going to destroy Nico Price. Price is coming off the win over Alex Morono, where both of them look to be moving in slow motion. And I think, in a sense, it was a bad performance by both. Prates is coming off a sensational knockout of Charles Radke, but he doesn't have any legit names on his resume. Like, he hasn't beaten any real proven UFC contenders. Sure, he knocked out Trevin Giles, but that's not a massive win. It's not. I think that Nico Price, at the very least, is a fun style matchup because you know he's going to look to bang. And he's tricky on the feet. Nico Price is awkward. He has power. He's had some big knockouts. And I also think it's a chance to really showcase Prates. He said he wants to fight in Australia, though. So who knows if Nico Price is ready for that quick turnaround. But he's got another kid on the way. And I think Nico Price needs a bag. And taking on Carlos Prates is a fight that gets me intrigued. And I think it's a chance for Prates to really showcase against a guy that at the very least is a longtime UFC veteran with a lot of savvy experience. And we'll find out how he does. I think Prates will probably destroy Nico Price. I think it'll be a sensational knockout, and it's a fight that I want to see next. So I'm going Prates versus Nico Price. Let's keep moving down. Daniel Marcos versus Said Nurmagomedov. It's time you give Marcos a hard fight. Said, I think, is ranked number 15 in the world right now. His only recent loss is a really close fight against Martinez, where people even felt it could have went his way. And then, you know, his last W was against Muin Gafarov, who's honestly pretty far down in the bantamweight rankings. Like, you know, it's not a win that moves many needles, but Said Nurmagomedov still is an elite talent, and so is Daniel Marcos. So what better way to test both of them by having them clash against one another? There's no better way to do it. Daniel Marcos deserves a ranked fight. He deserves to fight the number 15 guy. He deserves to fight Said Nurmagomedov. He should get a massive jump in the rankings with a dominant win over John Castaneda, and I don't think Nurmagomedov is an easy fight, though. But if you look at the striking, I think Marcos gives Nurmagomedov a lot of trouble. I think Nurmagomedov will also find it hard to get control time on the ground against Marcos. So it's a tricky puzzle to solve for both of them, and I'm really curious to see how the matchup would end up unfolding. I favor Daniel Marcos a tad in that fight, but Nurmagomedov has extremely good chokes. and he would be live to win by submission in that fight. So I love the matchup between Said Nurmagomedov and Daniel Marcos. I'm hard voting for that one. This is one of my favorite matchups, actually, out of all of the ones I talked about. That is a bantamweight clash that could be fireworks. We got another bantamweight fight. Taylor Lapilus versus Victor Henry. Makes sense. Victor Henry's coming off the win over Hani Yahya. He had the no contest in the fight before that with Basharat. I think that Henry is really good, and I think that he is a good test for Lapilus and a needed resume piece if Lapilus is going to get moved up the ranks. It's not like you can give Lapilus a ranked guy with the win over Cody Stamann simply because he has a pretty clear loss to Farid Basharat. Now, Basharat is scheduled to fight against Montel Jackson, who I believe is top 15 right now. So if Lapilus were to go out, beat Victor Henry, and then who knows what happens with Montel Jackson and Farid Basharat. Not that it necessarily matters, but I kind of use the matchups of fighters that were, recently beating X-Fighter as the measuring stick of how far up the ranks we're really allowed to move some of these guys. And I think this is a step up in competition on paper. I don't think it's a step up in competition in actual matchup. I feel like Cody Stamann and Victor Henry, if they fought against one another, I think Cody Stamann could win the decision. I do. But Victor Henry is a guy that's towards the top 15. He does have a big win over Hayani Barcelos, which is aged pretty well. Barcelos looked decent recently. I know he's a little bit old. I thought about maybe Lapilus Barcelos, but if they're doing it in France, I don't know why. I just don't think they're going to bring a Brazilian. I think Victor Henry would take it, especially with Josh Barnett in the corner. We're like, yeah, we're going to France. We'll fight you anywhere. Taylor Lapilus and Victor Henry's a good fight. It's a fun stylistic matchup, and it's very much a Taylor Lapilus winnable fight. I think Lapilus will definitely beat Victor Henry. I think he's going to be like a minus 250 favorite or more. I see him as a big favorite there. So am I giving a layup to Lapilus? Not intentionally, but maybe slightly. Those are all the fights that I want to see after this UFC Louisville card. I'm curious if you guys agree. I definitely think there can be a debate about who Cannonier should fight next and who Imavov should fight next. I think there could be like a pretty strong debate about those potential fights. But everything else I think is pretty steadfast and sensible. But let me know in the comments if you disagree. I want to know. Let me know if you agree, disagree, matchmake. And if you think that I left anybody out, let me know who they are, and let me know who you think they should fight next. These, to me, were the key fighters on the card. Some winners, some losers, but all of them deserve fights to be match made from me. So hopefully the UFC ends up making some of these fights. I want to know what you guys agree with, man. I want to know the favorites of the people. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Smash the like button if you're new. Subscribe. Listen, I promised this series, and here it is, another episode of it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Peace out.